It's time to take care of business on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180. Once again, here are your hosts, Marty Pay and Clay Kerner.
There are reports that there is no evidence of a direct link between Baghdad and some of these terrorist organizations.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Excuse me, but is this an unknown unknown?
I'm not.
Several unknowns, and I'm just wondering if this is an unknown.
I'm not going to say which it is.
Mr. Secretary,
I'm right here. I'm right here.
You know, Gary, what scares me is I understand that. We're having a conversation with Gary Berntsen, the former CIA commander on the ground in Afghanistan, on Taking Care of Business, Kern Radio Newstalk 1180. Gary, what do you think? Was the fact that bin Laden, you had him there, is that a known known or a known unknown? The fact
it's clearly a known known now, and it was a known known by those of us that were there back in 2001. Part of the problem during that period of time was that in the Bush administration, was early in the administration, the president wasn't that confident, wasn't as fully informed as maybe as he should have been. Same thing with Cheney and Rumsfeld. I know these are guys that were experienced before, but they knew little about Afghanistan. They, unfortunately, bet on the Pakistanis. The Pakistani president, Musharraf, promised them that he would put troops on the backside of Tora Bora, which they did not.
Well, Gary, let me ask you this. Who made the decision not to go after him? Was it...
Well, it's not that they made a decision not to go after him. You know, we had forces on the ground. I had first a 4-man team that went in, then they were assisted by I had a full 8-man team in, and then a special forces team in, and then finally they gave me, a 40-man Delta Force unit, which was wonderful, brave guys. What I was asking for was 800 Rangers.
Right. Well, let me rephrase that question, okay? Because, according to your book, you asked for the 800, which made sense because that's the only way to seal up that border. Why did you not get the 800?
Well, I think that they were concerned about casualties.
Uh-huh.
They were concerned of altitude. They were concerned with a lot of things. They were concerned about losses, quite frankly, because up to that point we'd been operating without losses, very few losses. And I think that they were just concerned about that. It was going so perfectly up to that point that they didn't want to bite off on that risk and were willing to outsource the final piece of that thing to the Pakistanis, which I disagreed with.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. This is just an assumption on my part, okay? After listening to, reading your book and reading The Longest War by Peter Berggruen, do you think it had anything to do with the fact that President Bush, who I really liked, but Bush wanted to go into Iraq, and if we would have picked up bin Laden, that would have been in the end of the story?
No. Yeah, they wanted bin Laden. Okay. We all wanted bin Laden taken. There was no effort to stop me there. It was just, I think it was not malicious intent. It was just a failure of competence at the very end.
And of strategy, basically.
And of strategy,
sure.
Yeah. But they just didn't understand that you have to go that extra mile to end it. And I'm not saying that the president wasn't competent. I shouldn't use that term. But they just didn't understand what was needed at the end. And try as I did, at the top of my lungs to get you get these guys to listen, it was very, very difficult because people, when they get to the White House, the air gets a little thin. They think they know everything. That's part of the problem.
Gary, this is Clay. A couple of questions.
Sure.
First off, you talked about a Blue 82 bomb that you dropped since you couldn't go in and get bin Laden.
Right.
What's a Blue 82 bomb, number one?
15,000-pound device that you push out the back of a 130. It's so big you can't even hang it on the wing of an aircraft, and when it detonates, it was the largest non-nuclear device in the U.S. inventory. And when you push that thing out, it has a little bit of a parachute on it. It has a nose cone, so that when it hits, it doesn't burrow into the ground, but it's a tremendous blast radius. And we used one of those, the last one we had in our inventory at the time, because they have to mix them up. We threw out there into Tora Bora and dispatched a number of bin Laden's people to the next world. He unfortunately was on the outer side of the ring. He was injured but survived.
Do you think there was enough virgins available for all those people you killed?
I'm not sure.
And then the other question was, why is it so important that we get bin Laden?
Well, I think that, look, he planned and executed an attack on the United States, which resulted in the death of 3,000 people here in the United States. Not all Americans, but the vast majority of them are Americans. And we have a responsibility to through all of those to capture or kill the individual that did that, and he's a symbol to the other side. And I think taking that symbol off the table is an important thing. We don't want him to escape justice.
Well, there's also a number of other symbols on the other side, and I'm wondering, are we more interested in Hezbollah? Are we Al-Qaeda, Hamas? Who's our biggest enemy out there?
Well, Al-Qaeda is directing its activities against us. We've had Hezbollah attack us in the past, but Hezbollah has focused its efforts on Israel. Same thing with Hamas, pretty much. Al-Qaeda has focused its efforts on the U.S., on the West. That is our number one enemy. Now, I was the chief of Hezbollah operations in the agency for a number of years, so I know about Hezbollah, and they have done attacks on the U.S., and prior to 9/11, they had killed more Americans than any other group. But they, in the years since, they have shifted their focus almost exclusively over to the Israelis.
Gary, this is Marty again. Excuse me. When you and I were initially talking, and I asked you what kind of background I could do for research, and you suggested Peter Bergman's book, The Longest War. I got to tell you, I enjoyed the book. I'm just finishing it up. It's a pretty long one, but it made me as mad as McNamara's book in retrospect, looking at it, and also as mad as Obama's war made me, Woodward's book, because you look at this and you go, okay, if they just let somebody do what they let you do, it's true American power. It didn't take a lot of casualties, thank God, and you got the job done. In his book, he talks about the fact that since we didn't do anything, there was no retribution for the coal incident, and that made 9/11 a lot easier for them to pull off because they didn't think we were going to do anything.
Correct. They didn't believe that we would stand up against them. It's the same thing. It's like being bullied on the playground. You have to act in your own defense. The failure to act and respond to the coal was a big mistake, and it was a failure of strategic politics.
Do you think the Clinton administration didn't have the will to fight?
The Clinton administration looked at things differently. They approached terrorism sort of with the law enforcement. It was crime, and we would act against them because they were criminals. But they didn't understand that this was an army of people, waging war against us. They wouldn't accept that fact. They wanted to arrest them, whereas many of us who understood the problem knew that they were an army fighting against us, and we believed they needed to be destroyed, and that they needed to be, fought on the battlefield and killed. But in those days, we had an executive order called Executive Order 12333, which prohibited the use of lethal force against these individuals. Now that has been swept aside, we can fight them.
We're having a conversation with Gary Berntsen, the former CIA commander on the ground in Afghanistan, on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180.
Gary, what about the current administration? What do you think of their position?
Well, it's a complex time. The Obama administration is facing still a bit of conflict and controversy in Iraq. We're trying to help the Iraqis move forward, but progress was made by the Bush administration, significant progress, and the surge worked. Looking at Afghanistan, they were very, very slow to come up with a policy. It was very interesting, though, that candidate Obama ran against the use of American power out there, but President Obama winds up sending 30,000 Marines in there as part of a surge, and probably 20,000 civilian contractors to accompany them. He learned a little bit in between the time he was a candidate and when he became the president. I was a little concerned because they were again slow on Libya. Thank God for the French. Sarkozy has jumped into this thing with both feet. Has gotten his aircraft up in the air. They would have slaughtered. There would have been a genocide in Benghazi had the French not gotten their aircraft up in advance.
Do you think it's too little, too late, Gary, with Libya now?
No, I think that U.S. The United States has moved aircraft into some Italian bases. The Canadians are there. The Denmark has sent aircraft. The French have already, I believe, shot down one of the Libyan planes. So the people on the ground now all of a sudden recognize that there's hope, but many, many of them have lost their lives.
Are we sure? Do you know who we're really supposed to support over there?
Well, let me just say this, that I know that Gaddafi continues to state that I'm fighting against Al Qaeda. Well, I don't think he's fighting against Al Qaeda. Will Al Qaeda members go in there and try to influence events? Sure, they will. But a large number of these people are just looking to get rid of a tyrannical dictator who's done horrific things to them and had murdered large numbers of American citizens as well. I have, there's no love lost for Colonel Gaddafi here, and I suspect that his days, may be numbered now that the international community is coming in. The U.S. has been talking about, protecting the people of Benghazi and that the killing needs to end. But you've got the French and a couple of others that are talking about removing Gaddafi. And isn't that interesting that the U.S. Policy on this from the administration would be not so aggressive, and that we'd be letting the French lead this?
Yeah, isn't that funny? Sarkozy of all people. I mean, it's I saw him this morning. He looked very American presidential out there. Well,
when he ran for office, this is a guy that ran as a man that respected and loved the United States. This is a great guy. This is a guy that if he'd been an American citizen, he'd been a great president of the United States.
So
he understands what we're about. He understands. He supports the free market. He believes in a strong foreign policy, and he believes in backing up his words.
So I guess I can start ordering French fries instead of freedom fries.
Yes,
now, huh?
Yeah, I think I think you can. I've said this to others too. I've met a lot of French military officers and members of the French security services over the years that were embarrassed by the policies of their government, and a number of them were very embarrassed by some of the things that Chirac did, because Jacques Chirac constantly worked at odds against the United States. But Sarkozy is a guy that ran as a friend of America, and he's leading his country as a friend of America and as a friend of freedom-loving people around the world. Good for him.
Gary, this hour is going to go way too quick. I can see it already. We're going to be back in a couple of minutes with Gary Berntsen, the former CIA commander on the ground in Afghanistan, on Taking Care of Business, Kern Radio Newstalk 1180.